Hello and welcome to this episode of Kitchen Pedagogy. I want to talk about the issue of teacher feedback, teachers receiving feedback, and how you might know how well things are going. Essentially, there are three different places you can get feedback from. You can generate it yourself by thinking about your own practice. You can get it from the students, not just from them telling you how they feel about your lessons, but from the evidence of the work and how their learning is going. So essentially through formative assessment. And you can get feedback from someone else who has maybe observed you teach or has come to watch and is working with you. So those are the three main areas. Now, to begin with, I do think most of the time, most feedback that you generate as a teacher comes from you. That's just natural. You're in your own lessons all the time, obviously. And so a really effective teacher is likely to be highly evaluative, thinking about how to improve, how to nudge things forward. And I really think that's a brilliant mindset to have, that you're constantly evaluating, changing in a planned sort of way. And I do think it often pays to try to be the fly on the wall in your own lesson and think about whether or not all the students are learning. It's not about critiquing you as a performer. And sometimes I think that's a dangerous mindset to get into. We can't be someone else. We have to be ourselves. We have to know ourselves. But regardless of our kind of strengths, our character, how loud our voice is, or how charismatic might be, or whatever the kind of the variables are, the students have got to be getting the most out of that. And it's important to consider what it would be like to be, say, a shyer student or a student who's struggling or a very confident student, and are they getting the most out of the lesson? So if you review your lessons from the perspective of a student being in your own room and think hard about whether or not you engaged them all, stretched them all, supported them enough, it can be very productive. It's also important to think about what messages you're giving and whether the students would have heard things in the right spirit. So you might have said something like, "Has everybody understood? Are there any questions?" Genuinely feeling that that was your opportunity to get students to say what they're not sure of or to confirm their understanding. But actually what they might have heard was, "Has anyone got any questions? Kind of, please don't have any because I'll need to move on." And you kind of put them off. So if you had asked a question like a checking for understanding question like, "Michael, what have you understood?" And you know that's a better strategy. Are you doing it? Are you using the strategies you know are more effective? If you know, for example, cold calling is an effective way of making sure all the students are with you thinking, are you doing that in a sustained way throughout the lesson? Have a think about your lesson. Are you sort of defaulting to hands up and calling out and taking a few correct answers kind of knowingly, even though you'd rather not be doing that? It's just how things have turned out. So be reflective in that way, and I think that's very, very useful. And then make a commitment to trying that bit harder to pursue the thing you know to be the right thing, but sustaining it and involving the students who are perhaps less confident, but also making sure that no one in your class could ever say they have finished or that it's not challenging enough. Imagine being the highest attainer in your class. Do they love it because it's just rigorous and demanding and challenging, which is what they enjoy? Think about it from that perspective. The second thing is then the evidence. I mean, there's no point sort of going to your colleagues and saying, "Yeah, my lessons are going really well. I'm feeling like it's really working," and just talking about how you feel about it, because you can be right or wrong about things. I've known teachers who are incredibly damning about their own practice, unnecessarily so. They can be very hard on themselves. And you're saying, "No, what you're doing seems to be working really well. I'd be pretty happy with that." And they go, "Oh, do you think so?" And often they're relieved to hear that, because their self-evaluation is about a feeling of it not being quite perfect or some imperfections. But I always think it's a mistake to evaluate lessons from the perspective of how you feel too much because of the error there. It's better to think about what's happening to the students. Are you getting better outcomes from them is the main thing. Are they producing better work in the long term? Are you getting generally more students answering? Are you getting generally better quality of responses from them? Are they seeming to remember more when you're doing retrieval practice? Those sorts of things. That's the kind of evidence you're after. So avoid the feels and think more about the products, because that's going to give you a better indicator of whether the things you're doing are generally working or not. And finally, there's the whole issue of observer feedback. And this is something which teachers can't always control. It depends on the culture you're in. But I do think it's really important to think about this when you are someone who observes lessons or receives it. I always think the chances of someone sort of popping into your lesson, observing things, writing some feedback on a bit of paper and giving it to you, the chances of that making a difference are pretty low compared to the post-observation chat where, as the teacher, you have the opportunity to say what you personally feel you could do differently before anyone said anything. Because then you're more likely to own that feedback, to kind of internalise it, to work on it next time. Whereas when you receive feedback on a sheet from someone who you can't even engage with, you'll think, well, what do you mean by this? Or you have different ways of thinking about the terms, and even the way they describe your behaviour might be not how you interpret it. So there can be all kinds of issues with that. If you're someone who gives feedback, think hard about that. Is this person really likely to improve their practice because you've written what you've written on the slip? Really? Or is it just you sort of fulfilling some sort of accountability process for your own benefit? And if it's really that, then have a think about whether or not you just do need to go and have the conversation. I know schools where they barely record any of these conversations at all because they're so dynamic and the teachers are just spoken to, and that's a better culture. So I really think that in the long run, when we sort of worked all this stuff out, that the idea of people dropping into a lesson, giving a bit of feedback on the fly via a written statement will seem sort of ludicrously old-fashioned and sort of bizarre even, because of the disconnect between the person seeing the things from their perspective and the teacher who has to do all of the stuff in the lesson, knowing the students, knowing the curriculum, and what they are setting for themselves as their agenda. And I really think that good feedback and coaching systems, which primarily support the teacher to shape their own agenda, are far, far more likely to work, to be sustained, and to allow the teacher to feel that sense of professional growth, which is all important. So then, just to recap then, so think hard about these things. Feedback about how you're doing comes mainly from yourself, if you're reflective. It comes from assessment of the students and how well they're doing, and it can come from feedback and coaching systems, provided that they are done in the right spirit, so that the teacher is always the owner of that and is driving it forward.